Hello, and thank you for the opportunity today to speak with you about partnering with patient advocacy organizations and clinical trial development. I'm Wendy Newman, and I am the head of patient advocacy for Reneo Pharmaceuticals. And I'll tell you a little bit about Reneo before we get into the presentation. So Reneo is a very small clinical stage company. We're focused on developing therapies for people with genetic mitochondrial diseases. We have a very experienced team that's led many successful programs in rare disease. We have 3 indications. We have one drug, which is REN001. It's a PPAR agonist, and PPAR agonists control genes involved in cellular energy metabolism. And the 3 indications that we're currently conducting clinical trials on are primary mitochondrial myopathy, long-chain fatty acid oxidation disorders, and McArdle disease, glycogen storage disease type 5. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the study that's going on with McArdle disease in a little bit closer to the end of the presentation. But I thought what I'd do is just talk a little bit about the landscape of rare disease. There are 7,000 rare diseases, and about 300 million individuals are affected worldwide. You know, although biopharmaceutical researchers have spent a tremendous time and have made progress in advancing innovations for rare diseases, there's still not a lot of treatment options. 95% do not have treatment options, and it represents a significant unmet need for many, many patients and individuals. So rare diseases are also common in aggregate, but each condition is extremely unique, which really does cause challenges in the drug development process and is also incredibly expensive to do studies in rare disease. As far as McArdle, the prevalence that's currently estimated is 2 in 100,000 individuals, and currently there are no approved drugs for McArdle disease. Other therapies, but no other drugs at this point in time. So what are the real challenges in rare disease drug development? Well, we talked a little bit about clinical trial development, and clinical trial design and interpretation is a huge challenge. So when you compare drug development to regular drug development in rare disease, there's significant challenges. So not only do rare diseases affect very few people, but patients are often dispersed in large geographic areas, and they're often share the same disease, but the presentation in clinical courses is very, very different. So there's still a real poor understanding of this disease progression. The study endpoints may not also be very well designed. And an endpoint is really that measurement that is used in a clinical trial that really measures and shows the benefit to patients. And we'll give some examples of that as we talk a little bit further. It's also very difficult to generate convincing clinical safety and efficacy data when there's such a limited number of patients in these studies. And studies also, the results may not be representative of the entire population of patients. So you've got a very small group of patients, they're widely dispersed throughout the world, and as you're recruiting for clinical trials, it's hard to find individuals that really represent the entire population. So let's talk a little bit about enrolling and engaging patients in clinical trials. So rare diseases, as we said, affect very, very few individuals, and patients are often dispersed, as we mentioned, and they're also typically fairly heterogeneous. And when when we're talking about heterogeneous populations, it's really how the disease actually manifests itself very differently in both terms of symptoms and also in terms of severity. Finding enough patients to fit inclusion and exclusion criteria for the trial can also be incredibly difficult. In some cases, you're looking for particular individuals who may be of an age, which may be a little bit easier, but then you might have individuals that would have to fit into an inclusion criteria that maybe they're an age-related, it's a specific form of a disease. Exclusion criteria can make it difficult because you may have individuals as well that have a pre-existing condition or on particular medications. So lots of challenges, but lots of individuals and companies are in this space because they care about rare disease drug development. They care about the population of individuals who are affected. And they really are incredibly, in my experience, very passionate individuals who work in these companies and organizations and are very dedicated to finding a treatment for these diseases. So let's also talk a little bit now about the background of drug development. So over the years, there's been a real shift in drug development directed by science only to really one that's driven by the needs of patients and their caregivers. You'll sometimes hear a lot about patients that are involved in particular trials that are or clinical trials and are involved in those from the beginning all the way through the end, not just being part of a clinical trial, but also being part of providing information to organizations and industry ahead of time, reviewing some of the criteria that are involved in the trials, and also helping with developing materials and educating industry about their disease. So the company must fully understand the burden of disease from patients and their caregivers. This is an incredibly important aspect of drug development. So when you find an assay and you're ready to look at particular disease areas, the first people you should talk to are the patients to learn more about their experience and more about the burden of disease. You really are the best source of knowledge for your clinicians, for industry, even for regulators. And so there's multiple stakeholders who really benefit from understanding about the burden of disease in rare disease patients. So I mentioned clinicians, there's regulators, there's insurance companies. If a drug passes the FDA, it's going to be payers, and they need to learn and understand more about what the burden of disease is like for you and what it is like to live with these diseases and all of these rare diseases. So why does your participation really matter? Well, first of all, it's really important the healthcare team understand your disease. So from the beginning, you come into, and many of you have probably been to multiple healthcare providers throughout the course of trying to, number one, figure out what's wrong with you and what are some of the symptoms that you may have had over the course of your life. Many people with McArdle disease aren't even diagnosed with McArdle disease till they're well into their 20s, 30s, 40s, and maybe even 50s. So being able to educate your healthcare team, all aspects of your living with this disease are incredibly important. And I can tell you that IamGSD has done an incredible job in providing materials that you can provide to your physicians and other types of books and tools that you can provide just to give them the education about the disease that's important so that they can take the best care of you. Investigators need your input into study and design of protocols and what we call patient-reported outcomes. So the patient-reported outcomes and termed PROs, I'll give you an example of how we were able to interact with your team and your group with IamGSD and helping us with our patient-reported outcomes. And also to review study materials early on. So there's a lot of forms, there's a lot of study materials that get submitted for review from the FDA, informed consent forms, and you're probably very familiar with this. You fill out a lot of informed consent forms when you're having procedures or different types of clinical care from your physicians, and also taking part in clinical studies and survey studies. So clinical studies, like clinical trials, it's so incredibly important for you to raise your hand, for you to take the time, if you can, to participate in studies. As I said, rare disease research is so difficult. And the number one reason why many clinical studies fail is because they cannot reach the enrollment of patients that they need in clinical studies. I think many people have learned a lot about clinical research and clinical studies recently through this COVID pandemic, and many people raised their hand to participate so that we could find a drug to use as a vaccine. But in rare disease, it's so important to meet those numbers in clinical studies because there's so very few patients, and it's a huge challenge, as I mentioned earlier. But there's lots of other studies that are done as well, including survey studies. So you may be asked to participate in survey studies. So any kind of study, as I mentioned, like a PRO type of study, or just quality of life, or asking questions about your disease, for example. I know that IamGSD has done many of these survey studies. I've seen them on their websites. I know the team works very diligently to get people to participate in these studies. Also participating in a focus group or an advisory board, a little bit more informal than a survey study, but many of the rare disease companies now have advisory boards made up of patients and caregivers who help to facilitate discussions and provide feedback on programs that the company is actually wanting to launch, or it might even be part of the drug development process. The other thing that is real important for all diseases, participate in registries. So I included the Courts Registry and NeuroMac, for example, because those are two registries that IamGSD has been involved in. And I'll talk a little bit more about CORDS in a moment. CORDS is it's an acronym for Coordination of Rare Disease at Sanford. And then the other aspect of participating in research and education is really telling your story. If you're ever invited to speak at an event, if someone wants to interview patients so that others can learn more about the disease, telling your story really gives the researchers and others a real sense of what it's like to live with your disease. And regulators, including FDA, we consider obviously one of the biggest regulators, increasingly ask about patient experience. That is so important for them because a lot of the issues having to do with your disease and the drugs that are being developed are really related to more of symptom management. And so many of these PROs and many of the endpoints are related to function and feel. And therefore, regulators increasingly ask about these issues having to do with quality of life and living with the disease. So I want to sort of make a shift here to talk about IamGSD and our patient advocacy partnership. I'm trying to remember the date, but I believe that back in 2018, Reneo and reached out to the IamGSD team, specifically Stacy, as I was doing some research about McArdle disease and to find out if there was anyone within this group that had actually a patient advocacy organization. And we had several conversations, and we were so incredibly fortunate to have Stacy come out to our offices in San Diego and to meet with our Reneo team and spend the day with us for sort of an informal meet and greet, and to give us an opportunity to ask Stacy a lot of questions about the organization and to share with us the experiences they've had over the last 10 years in listening and learning and really developing a community, and for us to learn a lot more about the disease and a lot more about what your personal journey's been and with McArdle's. And so we continued that learning. We were fortunate enough at the same time, there was a GSD conference in the UK, and we were able to send our UK team. So as I mentioned, we've got a team here in Southern California, and we've got a team in the UK, and the team in the UK was able to attend that conference, and they were able to listen and learn from those of you who attended that meeting, and from some of the individuals who were speaking, a lot more about your experiences with this disease that were very beneficial for us in the development of our McArdle program. And then, fortunately, before all the craziness last year with COVID, in 2019, your GSD organization had the conference in Houston, and for those of you that were there, we were fortunate enough to make it because many people got stuck with an awful rainstorm that occurred, but those that persevered, we were able to attend that conference. And I was very fortunate, along with our chief medical officer to come and listen to all the phenomenal presentations that were given. And we're also fortunate to participate in some demonstrations that were done, exercise demonstrations that were done by Dr. Alfredo Santella. And we learned an incredible amount about, about some of the challenges that you experience, as well as what were some important things that we needed to include in our clinical trials that we were going to be measuring. And so this was just an awesome opportunity for us. I had to include this slide because I want to thank Andrew Wakeland for taking everyone on a quick walking demonstration that we all participate in this crazy humidity of Houston. Again, an opportunity to kind of hear more about how he has educated a lot of individuals within this community. So the other piece of this is that we also were learning at this time about your personal journey of living with McArdle disease. So I want to thank all of you who accepted my calls when we had individual one-off questions from our researchers that we needed answers to. And I was asked if I could connect with some individuals who were living with McArdle disease to help us answer some of those questions. So again, we could include those important factors in our studies. And then the other thing as well is that we did some concept elicitation research, and I know this is sort of an interesting way of putting it, but it's basically was helping us to select the patient-reported outcome measures that we were going to be utilizing. So this is helping us to understand those concepts that were really important to you from a quality of life and function and field perspective. So a lot of these patient-reported outcome measures are based on more of a qualitative type of measure, things like fatigue or pain or muscle weakness or muscle issues and so forth. The other piece here is that many of the phase 1 study design and measurements were selected as a result of all of these interviews that we had with you and all of the patient PRO selection were all of the conversations and research. I have to say we did have to do a lot of literature review and a lot of research ourselves to go back into the literature. But a big part of what helped us in putting together this study were all of the input that we received from you. And so I had mentioned I wanted to talk about the CORDS registry. I was fortunate enough to meet the individuals that run this registry about 3 years ago in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, at the Sanford Research Institute. This is the only international registry, free international registry that is offered to patient advocacy organizations. They set up these registries for all rare diseases, and any patient organization that wants a rare disease, that wants to set up a rare disease registry, can reach out to the individuals at CORDS. So I introduced this group to Stacy, and she was able to connect with them and create and work very diligently, as most of the team does at IamGSD, to put together a registry for McArdle's. And I just included a little screenshot here of what's on the IamGSD website. And I really encourage you to get on their website and to learn a little bit more about the CORDS registry and to participate and share all of your information there. It's all confidential, and it does help all researchers in the field of all of these rare diseases to learn more about the disease and the journey that you go through, and to be able to provide that data so that we can provide obviously more research and more information in the future. And the clinical practice standards support. So I want to congratulate IamGSD again for spearheading the development of clinical practice standards. Reneo was very pleased to be able to support this very important project. And hopefully this practice standards will be utilized by all the experts and other physicians as they launch this and get this out to all physician groups, which is a whole nother endeavor. But just leading this, I know, is a tremendous work, and I commend all of you who worked on this project and all of the McArdle International experts in putting these together. And so, our interest, we talk about ongoing support and information sharing and working together. Our interest is to continue a long-term partnership with you all. We do not know if our drug's going to work, but it's really important that we continue to learn and strive for the best care and treatment of all of you who are living with McArdle disease. We want to continue to collaborate with you on all treatments to help improve the quality of life with all of those who live with McArdle disease. So I'm going to do a quick little shift because I know some of you are interested in hearing a little bit more about the clinical trial. So the McArdle disease clinical trial that Reneo is running is a Phase 1b clinical trial. It's an open label clinical trial in adults with McArdle disease. An open label basically means that everyone involved in the clinical trial will get the drug. The principal investigator is Ross Quinlivan. Many of you are familiar with Ross, who's been so involved in the McArdle disease community and organizations. And the objective and actually there's two sites, which I need to mention for this trial, the site in the UK and the site in Spain. And both of these sites follow a large number of patients with McArdle disease. So the primary objective is to evaluate the safety and tolerability of 12 weeks of REN001, the drug that I had mentioned, in subjects with McArdle disease. And they will be looking at exploration of changes in clinical outcomes, such as the 12-minute walk test, and then other PROs, as we mentioned, which include something called SF36 scale, and then patient global impression of change, and several others that were deemed as being important PROs to include in this. There was really considerable enthusiasm when we launched this trial, and again, want to thank those of you who raised their hand to participate. Some of you had asked, why there wasn't a trial here in the United States, and one of the challenges in putting on rare disease trials is not only trying to find patients, but also trying to find and identify investigators who are willing to participate in clinical trials. And unfortunately, as we try diligently to identify a clinical trial site and an investigator, we unfortunately were unable to do so in the United States, but very fortunate that we're able to work with Dr. Quinlivan and the group in Madrid, Spain, in launching this trial. So where we're at right now, we did have a lot of patients who are lined up to participate. As you know, because of COVID, all clinical trials went on a halt. Most of the hospitals and sites were shut down for every clinical trial. And so we did have to go on a hold, and we were able to restart the trial recently. We anticipate final data in the first half of 2022. And when that happens, we'll be sharing that information. So what about looking ahead? Well, as I mentioned, for us, it's having results from the first phase of the trial. So we're excited about that. Again, we do not know specifically what the results are going to be, but whatever those are, we're hopeful, and we're trying our best. And so again, many thanks to the investigators and the patients who volunteered to participate. I think for all of us, we want to continue to build awareness of McArdle disease and research interest. And the more work that's done by organizations such as the IGSD, IamGSD, and all of the groups and patients, the better we all are. I think that the industry as well, every time that there's a research study, there's attention brought to this disease, not just to patients, but to clinicians, to regulators, to investors, for example. So, investors are also a key part of our stakeholder group that I didn't even mention, but clinical trials, as I said, are very incredibly expensive. And when you bring up some of these diseases, it really does educate investors about the particular disease and about the need for treatments in these diseases and why they should be supportive of the work that's being done from a research perspective. Improving diagnosis and care through clinical practice standards. We already talked about that. So again, kudos to IamGSD for all this incredible support. And I wanted to leave you with this: keep on walking. And I think I say that because again, we all learned so much about the importance of regular exercise for patients with McArdle disease. And a shout out to Andrew and all of those that started this organization. And I was just realizing as I was reading the website the other day that you just had your 11th year anniversary in July of the walk that you all did over Wales to raise awareness about McArdle's disease. So I again commend you. I am very grateful that I was asked to be part of this presentation, be part of the conference this year. I look forward to working with all of you again in the future. And I hope that we get a chance to all see each other next year at the conference, wherever that might be, and be in person. So we get a chance to see each other in person and share updates and information. So again, thank you for the opportunity to participate. Bye.